Hi everyone, good morning. Like they said, I'm Surya and I'm presently working in University of Hertfordshire as a Marie Curie Fellow. So today I'll be presenting on use of mineral waste in cementitious binders. So this presentation will not focus much on the results or what kind of strength you get, but rather it will discuss on what is a mineral waste, why it should be used in cementitious binders, and how it can be used in cementitious binders. So with rapid development, we have very large amount of production of commodities as well as we have very large consumption of raw materials. So say for example, when you use a lot of laptop or mobile phones, you tend to consume or use a lot of copper, tungsten, lithium and other materials for its production. And when you go for large amount of urbanization or construction, you need more cement for which you mine a lot of calcium carbonate and clay and for aggregates we again tend to mine for crushed rocks and everything. So when there is an increase in demand for these mineral commodities, we obtain these minerals by mining them. So whatever we mine, it may be a metallic or non-metallic mineral which we are getting from it, and once we start mining and when there is more demand, we don't have very good quality ores, so we tend to use the ones which are available. So we have high quality ores, and when you use high quality ores for production or extraction of whatever material you need, you have very low amount of waste material produced, which is about 40% of the waste. If you take 100 gram of ore, you get 40% of waste. Whereas when you start exploring the options of lower quality ores, the waste content increases, leading to about 70 to 80%. Say for every 20 gram of material produced, you tend to produce 80 grams of waste, which is very high in quantity, and it increases the quantity of mineral waste. On the other hand, we have urbanization, which increases rapid constructions, and cement being one of the major commodity in the construction industry, we have about 4.2 billion tons of cement produced every year. This increases the consumption of natural resources, like we mentioned before, limestone and everything. And again, for production of cement, it has to be heated at very high temperatures, and this leads to high consumption of energy. So all in all, this process results in about 3.595 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, making construction industry contribute to about 9% of the total global greenhouse gases. So this makes construction industry highly unsustainable, and there are a lot of campaigns going on against massive use of cementitious binders. I mean, a normal cement in construction. So with all this being in picture, there is a global scenario where people try to promote materials with low for energy efficiency, or materials with so this materials for low energy efficiency actually means use of material with low embodied energy, also reuse of material of high waste content. So when we tackle the waste of use of mineral waste in a cementitious binder, we can actually, what to say, we can target both of these in a one single process. So having said this, what is a mineral waste? We tend to extract valuable material from ores and other minerals obtained in the rocks and other formations. So after this extraction of your valuable mineral, whatever waste is left is called a mineral waste. It may be a residue, it may be a tailing, or it may be any other non-valuable material. And these wastes are generated at different steps of production of your needed metal or everything. So and depending on the type of the ore and the process adopted, the quality as well as quantity of these waste increases or decreases. So we have about 700 million tons of mineral waste produced every year, and they compose about 35% of the total urban waste produced or disposed of in the landfill. So let's take, for example, we need gold. So when we need gold, we tend to quarry the mines where there are gold minerals present. So when we say we are mining for gold, it's not that that place contains only the minerals which contain gold. It contains other materials like quartz, silicates, or normal rocks which we don't need. So in that process, we scrape off this unwanted materials, and we are left with minerals which has high concentration of gold. So these scraped off waste which are left in the place of mining, they contribute to mine waste, and when they are crushed to produce smaller segments of the needed commodity, or high extract concentrated materials, we are left with quarry waste or crushed rocks. So then afterwards, this material is processed to liberalize the metal which we need. So in the process of liberalization, we produce mine tailings. And after the metal extract is produced, it is molten in presence of lime and dolomite to remove this impure particles, which is known as slag. So slags are generally produced only in case of metallic extracts. So it is a high temperature molten lava kind of thing which is disposed of, and when you say this is disposed of, there are two ways of disposing it. So when the slag is disposed of directly into environment and let it cool naturally, we develop a highly crystalline slag. Whereas if they are quenched or poured into water where there is rapid cooling of these slag, it leads to formation of glassy materials. One such example is our ground granulated blast furnace slag. So people may ask, why do we use granulated blast furnace slag GGBFS, whereas we don't use other type of slag? The reason being, GGBFS is highly amorphous because they are cooled suddenly, whereas every or most other slags which are produced are crystalline because they are cooled slowly. They are at a temperature about 1200 degrees Celsius, and they gradually cool to room temperature, and the process may take more than 15-20 days. So these waste which are produced may be in solid form or like we discussed, in liquid or semi-solid form. So generally what happens is these solid wastes are disposed of into landfills. It may be a contained landfill or open landfill, and and if it is a liquid or in semi-solid form, they are disposed of into water bodies. So this water body disposal may be a direct disposal where they are disposed of into rivers or sea, which is mostly illegal, and indirect disposal where they are in form of slurry and they are poured into an already constricted confinement or pond as shown in the image, and they are let to remain there till its capacity is reached. So when there is, even after having a proper system of disposal, the failure of such mine tailing dams or mineral dams are highly frequent. So say, imagine a dam which has of height 40 to 80 meters high. And imagine this being filled with a material which is highly alkaline, which has a chemical composition which even doesn't let you touch them with bare hands, and has heavy metals and metalloids which are toxic when they reach the food chain. And imagine about 50,000 meter cubes of this. And now imagine this entire setup failing and leading to flooding. So what happens is entire city or state or whatever is in downstream faces a catastrophic flood with some material which is highly toxic. And this happens about 300 times every year globally. At least like there are about 285 to 300 cases of reported mine tailing dam failures. So one may argue, so if I construct a proper dam and if I let them remain there, the problem is solved. So that is not the case. So when your dam is still stable, even after that, you have other kinds of problem. This material is highly alkaline, and alkaline materials tend to leach. Leach as in the sodium or any alkali metals in them tend to leach after a particular period when they are exposed to water. Other than that, these material also contains metals and metalloids which are heavy and toxic, such as lead, chromium, vanadium, nickel, zinc, and all these. So, and another interesting phenomenon which happens here is acid mine drainage. This material, though it is alkaline, it may contain minerals which are sulfide. So when we talk about mineral waste, we don't talk about a single mineral. It is a composition. It may have 10 or 15 different minerals packed together as a single powder. So in that case, they have some minerals which are which contain very high amount of sulfides, like pyrites, arsenopyrite, or chalcopyrite. These are very commonly present sulfide minerals in the mineral waste commonly observed. So these sulfide waste, they come in contact with water and form sulfuric acid, and they tend to leach into environment. And this is a bigger issue because sulfuric acid is very corrosive, and it is dangerous to even touch with bare hands. So they enter the groundwater table when they leach from here. And also the mineral waste tend to be very fine in nature. Their particle size is very less. So even after the material dries, they start leading to air pollution and soil pollution in other ways. So this being a highly toxic material, there is a program, or there are many programs around the world to make the mining industry more sustainable, because it is unavoidable. We have to mine. So they have other ways of making this industry more sustainable. And this is called Near Zero Waste and Emission Program. And they target of about 95% reduction waste, at least by 2050. So what they target at is, they try to extract precious metals, rare metals, or whatever heavy metals from the mineral waste itself through different processes. So now we know our waste has heavy metals, and they try to extract these heavy metals. So after all these are extracted, there may be some waste left even after that, and they tend to use those waste in construction. So as of now, this is not happening much. What we have is a direct waste which we obtain from the plants, but this is for future. However, the reuse and construction part is something we will focus on, and which will be further carried out as well. So the research in hand, what we have is, we have a material with a physicochemical characteristics, which is a major problem. And this material is highly crystalline. It is non-reactive. It has physical, chemical, and mineralogical properties, which may be varying every single time you get from the plant. It is not that you choose one plant and you get one kind of waste which has the constant properties. It is always going to change. And these materials also have toxic metals and metalloids. So what problem we have in hand is a non-reactive material with certain reactive parts which are not favorable. So what we have to do is make the non-reactive phases more reactive, and the problematic reactive phases in a confined manner, so that they won't cause a problem. So there has been various researchers in this domain, and they have explored use of these waste as an aggregate, or as fine aggregate, as coarse aggregate, or in ceramics, tiles, and various other options. But in this presentation, we are pertaining only to the use in a cementitious binder. And there had been various studies in their use in cementitious binder as well, especially in the past decade, from 2010 to 2020, this trend has increased. So when we talk about the properties of these wastes may occur in solid form, powder form, or sludge form. And when they occur in sludge form, they have very high varying water content. Water content may be up to 22%, from 0 to 22%, and they are left out open in the environment. So this water content keeps varying. It is not that it is going to remain the same. And specific gravity is 2.7 to 4.29, which is highly dependent on the presence of iron left in the mineral after extraction. And water absorption is very high, and this creates a major problem when it is used as a fine aggregate. And this high water absorption is also because the material is highly fine. And the pH of the tailings vary from 6.9 to 10, and it is dependent on the composition. The pH is varying. And when we talk about particle size, they are from cement size particles to sand size particles. So from, like we see here, we have a D50 value of 17, and again we have a D50 value of 120. So it is not like one size waste we obtain here. So to bring them to a uniform platform, there may be some grinding or something which is required, which is called as pre-treatment. And after that, they can be considered for the use in cement. So when we talk about cement chemical composition, and when we talk about chemical composition for their use in cements, we mainly concentrate on CaO, SiO2, and Al2O3. So like we see here, these wastes generally tend to have one phenomenon which is very common. They are very low in their calcium content. Except for a particular process for zinc extraction. And we have highly siliceous waste. They have very high siliceous content. And then they have particularly predominant significant quantity of alumina. So one thing we have to remember is, these wastes come from natural rocks in most cases. And when they are from natural rocks, they are always tend to be dominant with silicate quantity. And we have this silica and alumina ratio, as well as basicity modulus, which say their reactivity things. So this is an image giving a picture of the composition of the materials, and you can see like all the wastes are mostly dominant towards silicates, whereas your cement is dominant towards calcium oxide. So when we talk about these ratios, we have these values and ratios, but the problem is, these values or ratios which are available in the material is not always available for reaction, because the waste are present in different forms. Say for example, when I say SiO2, SiO2 may be present as your quartz, or it may be a cristobalite. So when you say quartz is a non-reactive, almost inert material, whereas when I say cristobalite, it may be reactive in certain conditions. And when I say TiO2, it may be present as rutile or anatase. Rutile is a very stable mineral, whereas anatase is highly reactive, or they call it metastable. So when the material of same chemical composition can be present in different forms, it may be a point of concern, because the chemical composition which is shown in the studies may not always be available for the reaction. So then we have to consider, what do we think when we consider these materials for the use in cement? You cannot consider the chemical composition. So then what comes into picture is their mineralogical composition. So these materials are found naturally, so they tend to be dominant in alumina and silica concentration, and in presence of things, they are generally minerals like mica groups, phyllosilicate groups, we have oxide groups, we have carbonate groups, and all these, and we have clay minerals as well. So seeing this and seeing the type of minerals present in the material, that is how we decide what kind of treatment we have to adopt. And there is the like about 50% of the Earth's crust is mainly feldspar group of minerals. So when you consider feldspar, there are more than 20 minerals in the feldspar group, and each mineral has a different level of reactivity. So depending on what particular mineral is present, we have to choose which particular kind of treatment we can adopt to make it reactive. So we have certain values or indices or composition obtained from the chemical composition, but whatever we obtain from that value may or may not be available for reaction. So this brings into picture a need for making those materials available for reaction, or getting an estimate of what material is available for reaction. So this is where the activation comes into picture. So the process we are going to do is, we have to take an inert material, we are going to process it, and we are going to make it more reactive. And to come before this, we have to understand how a cementitious binder works. So when you add the cementitious binder or a hydraulic material with water, there is release of cations. These cations then pair up with suitable anions, and they achieve saturation in the system. So when there is saturation and they start settling down, and this is the gel formation. So in case of a normal cement, this gel formation or this phase will be formation of your CSH. So, and then finally, when this as they start settling down and the gel forms, the saturation in the system decreases and the hydration reduces and setting starts. So to achieve this cation release and to achieve this cation saturation, we need to have
Your voice is not audible, Surya.
No, sir. No audio.
Yeah. Check it.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, no. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now.
So when we talk about thermal activation, we talk about heating the material at a very high temperature where the existing minerals break down, and turn to amorphous or new mineral. So this happens at temperatures, various temperatures depending on the mineral's present. So this process leads to physical expansion, which may lead to cracking. So any material when heated, it leads to expansion. And the next process which happens is there may be decomposition of hydroxide and carbonate groups which are present in the mineral, which may lead to formation of a porous structure. And sometimes if we tend to heat it beyond a particular temperature, these material may fuse together and become more crystalline than it was in the beginning to start with. So it is always important to know which is the optimum temperature or temperature to which I will be heating this material to make the reaction more suitable for me. Say for example, if I have muscovite, if I heat it up to a temperature of 900 degrees Celsius, there is no change. But if I heat it up to 950 degrees Celsius, there will be a change, but it may not be necessarily favorable for me. It transfers from muscovite to mullite, which makes it again a non-reactive mineral, but of another sort. So to determine which temperature there may be reactions or which temperatures will be favorable for a reaction, we have to perform a thermogravimetric analysis and determine. So whenever there is a change here, it means there is some change with the material at that particular temperature. But this change may or may not be something which is favorable for us, which we have to look into with further tests. This treatment is highly recommended for minerals which have hydroxides as well as carbonates. Say for example, calcium carbonate decomposes somewhere around 650 to 850 degrees Celsius, and the same is in case of dolomite. And when you talk about hydroxide, the decomposition may be from 200 to 400 degrees Celsius. So depending on the types of minerals which are present in them, we can choose which temperature to go for. And any mineral which has hydroxide, carbonate are more suitable to be treated by thermal activation. And clay also falls into this category because clay also has a sheet of hydroxide ions. So now we talk about mechanical activation. Mechanical activation, the process is you impart energy externally through some mechanical process, and this imparted energy should be greater than the lattice energy which holds the crystals together. So this is generally done by high energy milling. So high energy milling, which means you mill it at a very high RPM, so about 1500 or something. So at that temperature, at that speed, what happens is these balls go and they tend to hit the materials repeatedly at a high temperature, and also they interact with the surface of the container inside which the grinding happens. And this leads to size reduction. It may knock off some of the ions from the crystal system, which may introduce some defects or distortion. And any material which has a defect is tend to react more. And then there may be also some heat developed because of the friction, which may lead to some chemical activation or modification. And interesting phenomena here is we have a system which has different minerals. And when there are different minerals, each mineral tends to get grinded at a different rate. This is called grindability index. So a material with a higher grindability index will become more finer than a material with a lower grindability index. Say for example, I have a system which has quartz and I have a system which has muscovite. So muscovite tends to grind more sooner than quartz. So this leads to a bimodal curve, where you have a same system where all the small size particles will be muscovite and all big size particles will be quartz after grinding for a particular time. And the specific surface area increases with grinding, and this tends to improve the reactivity. But the important thing to consider here is initially there is a zone where the grinding reduces the particle size and increases the specific surface area. And as the specific surface area increases and you tend to give more energy, these energy tend to overlap the individual particles as surface energy. So when there is surface energy and when they interact with each other and when they go beyond a particular point, they tend to agglomerate and start to form particles which are of larger size, like they accumulate together to form a lump of particles. Now what happens is this lump forms in a system at a temperature which is high because of after grinding there is heat because of friction, and there is pressure because of the movement of the balls which was generated. So when all this stops and the material is left to come back to the environmental condition, normal environmental condition, the clumps form, they tend to remain, and they tend to have a particle of size larger than the one we started with. So it is always important to know when to stop. Grinding time has to be, we have to find the optimum duration of grinding. For that particular case we are using. Also, grinding is not always suitable for all materials. Some materials like quartz, they tend to need about 200-300 minutes of milling, which is very high, and it is very high and highly energy intensive. So this energy consumed for grinding something for 300 minutes will be more than the energy which we need for heating in rotary kilns in cement. So this method is suitable for minerals which are stacked in structure. Say for example, the entire mica group. The first image shows your mica photograph of a mica mineral. So they all have a sedimentary sort of structure and they have layered arrangement. So these minerals tend to respond better to grinding than any other mineral. And the second image shows microstructure of clay, where you can see sheet-like arrangements of silicate and aluminate ions to form the system which is more suitable for grinding. And this shows the individual crystal modification. So all these hexagonal ones are individual crystals of clay. So after grinding, what happens is the clay structure loses its crystallinity and it becomes more glassy or amorphous. So the next method is alkali activation. So the difference between thermal mechanical activation and alkali activation is both thermal activation as well as mechanical activation are processes to improve reactivity. The product which is produced cannot be used as a standalone cement. Whereas in case of alkali activation, even if it is not always possible, in most cases, whatever we get as an end product can act as a standalone cement. Here, what we do is we use a mineral waste and we mix it with the activators, which are hydroxides, silicates, sulfates, or carbonates of alkali. So when you talk about hydroxide and carbonates, you are talking about pure alkali activation. And when you talk about silicates and when you talk about sulfates, we are talking about near neutral activation, near neutral alkali activation. So they tend to react with the silicates and aluminates present in the waste, and they form calcium aluminum silicate hydrate or sodium aluminum silicate hydrate gel instead of CSH gel, which is generally formed in a cementitious system. So this CASH and NaSH gel, they tend to solidify and gain strength and make them behave like a cementitious binder. And then there is a case of integration, where there are two processes adopted generally. So one is mechanochemical activation, where this term is actually used interchangeably. Sometimes grinding a material with some alkali instead of just grinding the material alone, that process is called mechanochemical activation. Sometimes what happens is the chemical modification which happens during grinding because of the heat developed, that process is known as mechanochemical activation. So whatever, when there is a mechanical reaction happening and there is also chemical modification happening, that process is known as mechanochemical activation. And then we have thermochemical activation. So this process is also known as alkaline roasting, where instead of heating the material individually to a particular temperature, we heat it with a material or with a alkali activator already. Say for example, albite, when you heat it alone, its decomposition temperature is about 1050 degrees Celsius, which is very high. Whereas if I heat albite with a little bit of sodium carbonate, the decomposition temperature reduces to 600 degrees Celsius, which means we are saving about energy of about 400 degrees Celsius of heating. So the most important thing to look out here is all the methods may not be suitable for all the mineral waste, and every method has its own limitations, and every method it also tends to a phenomenon where too much of anything is not good. So we have to find which is the optimum level of activation. So say in this case study, it is just to show the variance in the material or processes how we adopt. So this shows phosphate, kaolinite and lithium mine waste, and you can see their color, their form, or even the structure which in which they are obtained is highly different. So these materials, if they are pre-treated and tested, it has a chemical composition somewhere around this, and you can see kaolin and lithium base are more towards the silicate end. And when we see the main components, we can see these material has, say, if I talk about the phosphate waste, it has phlogophyte, which is responsive to grinding, whereas it has calcite and dolomite, which is responsive to thermal treatment. Similarly, kaolinite has muscovite, which is responsive to grinding, and it also has kaolinite, which is responsive to thermal treatment. So it also comes as a phenomenon of judgment. Like, you have to make a judgment call, which mineral is more and which treatment method is more optimum. So when I talk about this kaolinite waste, I can go for grinding, or I can go for thermal treatment. And as we discussed, kaolinite is a form of clay. It also has sheet-like structure. It is also responsive to grinding. So in this case, going for a grinding treatment will be more chances, will give you a more scope of improvement than any other method. So this is how we decide which treatment is suitable, and we have to go for a bit of trial and error before we actually decide which is perfect. So once we go for a treatment process, we have to see if the treatment actually helps the mineral in improvement, or is there any other thing we can do. So this can be done by various analytical tests. So the major one which is done is XRD. So where we find if there is any change in crystal structure. So say this is an example case where after a particular treatment, there is very high reduction in crystallinity. So the treatment works. And then if you are adopting any alkali-induced or chemical-induced modification, then it is important to perform its chemical analysis using XRF. Then the microstructure is studied to see if there is any change in crystal structure, or if there is any defect, or some cases when we have grinding, we can actually see visible cracks in the crystal, which knows your grinding is working. So such systems are in place to help to know whether or not the treatment process is working. And the most important one, like we had been talking from before, we don't know what is the available silica for the reaction, or we don't know what is the available aluminum for the reaction. So these quantities can be determined from ICP test, where the material is let alone in a alkaline environment, alkaline solution. They are mixed for a particular period, and then they are checked for the amount of silica and alumina released into that environment. So this gives us an idea how much of that particular material, silica and alumina, will be released from that particular material. And besides all this, we also have isothermal calorimetry, where we can see and study the hydration behavior of the materials. And this is something, and the next thing we need to know is reactivity. So reactivity, when we talk, when we have one case where we can use it as a alkali activated cement, and we have another case we can use it as a supplementary cementitious material. So to check its behavior with alkalis, we can perform strength test in presence of sodium hydroxide, or we can see the heat of hydration of that material in isothermal calorimetry in presence of different activators and different concentration, to see if it is actually working. And again, when you talk about pozzolanic activity, the major problem here is there is not one single test. There are many tests. You have Chappell test, you have modified Chappell test, you have Frattini test, and you have strength test, we have lime reactivity test. So there is no unified theory or unified test which might be suitable for determining reactivity. So there is a global research going on to make one test as a single stop solution, one stop solution. So that test is R3 test. So R3 test has two ways of getting done. One is to do it in a calorimeter and see how much is the total heat of hydration, cumulative heat release, and other is to heat the cement paste at 100 degrees Celsius and 400 degrees Celsius and see the water loss to determine what is the bound water content. So higher the bound water, higher is the reactivity of the material. So, and this test is performed in presence of calcium hydroxide, calcium carbonate, potassium hydroxide, and potassium sulfate mixed with the supplementary cementitious material. So all these materials in this particular quantity added gives the chemical property on pH of the system more similar to the OPC, ordinary Portland cement. So this could be one way where we determine if the material is reactive enough. Like take the material, test its R3 value in a raw state and test its R3 value after a period of treatment, and then see if there is any improvement or which is the best improved version of your material. And having done all this, and once you know the material is suitable, we have them used in a binder in 3 different forms. It may be a supplementary cementitious material, it may which also includes filler, and it may be a direct cement replacement, or it may be a precursor for alkali activated cement, which can help in the properties. So once we have all that, we test the fresh properties. So fresh properties, general phenomenon which is observed is with increase in mineral waste, there is increase in water demand. So when there is increase in water demand, it obviously interrupts with the setting time, and there is delayed setting time. Also, as these waste contains various other ions, presence of copper, lead, and phosphorus, they interfere with the rate of hydration, and they also delay the setting time. And whereas when there is calcium excess in the system, which is in very rare cases, so then there is decrease in setting time and also decrease in workability. And when we talk about hardened properties, we come to a system where we determine how much we are adding, how we are adding, and we know the maximum compressive strength which could be obtained using that particular material. And then we finally go for testing the other hardened properties. So there are various tests and studies performed, and they have achieved a maximum compressive strength of up to 75% with 100% waste. And one more thing to remember here is when we use thermomechanical treatment or thermal treatment, we have we cannot use it as a 100% replacement, whereas when it is alkali activation, we can use it as 100% replacement. So to talk about hardened properties, besides the chemical parameters, there is also the presence of hydrocarbon oil, which comes as a effect of process which is there. Or say in case of graphite mining, if the mine base itself contains graphite, there is a phenomenon of slipping. It doesn't bind well with each other due to the insulation behavior of these materials, and this affects the hardened properties. Besides that, any strength or compressive strength or flexural strength or any other property did not have a particular trend where we can say with the waste it increased or decreased. What exactly happened is it performed really well when there is the optimum percentage of replacement, whereas the performance declined depending on whether it is in lower than or higher than the optimum percentage of replacement. And when we talk about durability, the interesting phenomenon is when you use alkalis, the material alkali activation, the material performed in most cases when there is acid or other immersion, but however they did not perform that well just in water immersion if it is only sodium hydroxide. And similarly, conductive mineral waste like the waste with very high percentage of iron or waste with very high percentage of graphite, they affected the surface resistivity, chloride penetration, or corrosion behavior. When I say chloride penetration, the rapid chloride penetration, because there is application of voltage. So this affected the conductivity of the waste. And most cases, the mixes with these wastes were thermally stable up to 600 degrees Celsius. And they performed extremely well in a chloride ion environment. And this is similar to or in line with the materials which contain fly ash, because the chloride which try to penetrate with the through the material reacts with the material to form Friedel salt and gets arrested. This Friedel salt closes the pores and controls the further penetration of the material. So this is an interesting phenomenon. It was in line with fly ash as well. And when we talk about carbonation, the problem was in certain cases decrease in carbonation was reported, and certain cases increase in carbonation was reported. And this is mainly because of the more than the percentage of replacement. What we have to consider here is if whether or not it was the optimum percentage of replacement. Like we see here, the porosity variation is also dependent on the optimum percentage. So when there is less porous material, we have lesser carbonation and we have better durability performance. And it is the same in case of water absorption. Water absorption was low in case of optimum percentage, and the same trend was observed for sorptivity, and the same trend was observed for water absorption at higher pressure system. The only thing we have to consider in case of durability is certain composition are metastable. When they come as a product, they are not stable. So they initially have a very high strength. They remain for 7-8 days and they decompose to form a more stable product. And finally, they disintegrate. So you will not have a good 28-day strength. You will have a good 7-day strength. You will not have a good 28-day strength, which means the products which formed at 7 days decomposed before it reached 28 days. So these things has to be taken into account or considered when we actually see whether or not the mixed composition is working. And when we talk about environmental properties, from the beginning we had been saying our waste had very high amount of heavy metals, and these heavy metals leached and it caused problems in the environment. So what happens to these heavy metals when they are a part of a cementitious system? So what happens here is the physical and chemical encapsulation of heavy metals happen, and when this happens, there is reduction at least by 90%. 90% of leaching reduces, and it is different for different materials. Say when the material is cured in water, which is 7 pH, arsenic leaching is negligible, and when you say cadmium or lead or chromium, if I replace with 5%, there was more leaching than if I replace with 30%, which because 30% was the optimum in that particular case. And moreover, in all, what was observed is all the leaching phenomenon after the physical and chemical encapsulation or after their use in alkali activated cements or normal OPC replacement was lesser than any permissible standards. So to summarize what we had seen in all these slides, like if I have a waste which I want to use it as a cement, first I will characterize it and evaluate it. So characterization will be physical properties to see its specific gravity and particle size and pH, and chemical properties to see silica alumina content, and its mineralogical properties to see in what form the silica and alumina are present. And based on these data, we decide the course of treatment. So course of treatment will be, pre-treatment will involve normally heating it to 100 degrees Celsius, bringing it to a dry form, mechanical sizing where you grind it and bring it to cement size. And then there may be chemical activation or physical activation or mechanical activation, whichever, depending on the particular waste we get. And then we check for its reactivity, and we determine the reactive silica and alumina, and perform other tests to see if the treatment has worked and what is the optimum treatment. And once treatment is determined, we determine the prepare binders. So binders will be, if you are using it as a OPC cement, you grind it with clinker and other supplementary cementitious materials. If you're using it as an alkali activated cement, there will not be this clinker phenomenon. And one more thing to remember here is, if at all our waste does not have enough amount of silica or alumina, we can replace it externally. So if in case of alumina is not sufficient, we can add some other waste which has very high alumina, and if it is silica which is not sufficient, we can use a sodium silicate activator instead of a sodium sodium hydroxide activator. And finally, we have the cement, and we evaluate the cementitious binder which we produce for all the physical, chemical, and durability and long-term properties. As these materials we use are fine in nature, we tend to have a higher drying shrinkage than the OPC binders. So these are all there, and even after so much research, the reason why this is not still very famous is there is not a standard method for assessment of reactivity. R3 is there, RILEM is promoting it, but it is not anywhere mentioned that this is the R3 value which you have to have so that you can use it. So there is no backup which people can use it with confidence. And similarly, when you have a raw material which has a there are some 50-60 different minerals present in all mineral waste put together, and the raw material may have any 10 of them. So there is no particular set of data which will say this is the suitable raw material or this is not, or which is very essential or efficient. And there is no focused research on kinetics of the reaction or reaction products or any mathematical models for prediction. Like when you say you have OPC cement, you have certain equations which will give you what to expect after 28 days. What will be the creep after 28 days? What will be the elastic modulus after 28 days? We don't have any such thing for a system which has these materials. So this is why even after so much of research, there is lack in use of these materials in the present stage. But with further research, they will be used more dominantly in the future. So to conclude, all in all, you cannot say this is the optimum, this is the percentage of replacement, or the behavior modifies this way when you use mineral waste. When you use optimum percentage of mineral waste in cement, they perform well. Invariably, they perform well in strength, in durability.